Hello everyone, and welcome back to my series where I rank every game that I beat in a given year. As always, this is just my personal opinion, and if you're looking for something specific, there are chapters down below. Let's get started. Atlantis is about as basic of an action-adventure game as you can get. While it started off strong by introducing a fair amount of character-specific mechanics and potential for puzzles and Metroidvania-ing, it quickly devolves into a bare-bones platformer. The combat is extremely basic and easy, which made all of the upgrade crystals that you would find for your weapons completely pointless. In fact, there's no real reason to go for any of the collectibles. The crystals only give you a 1-up if you collect them all, which I had 35 lives by the end of the game, plus they aren't even included in level completion. The Atlantis letters unlock the somewhat lengthy movie clips that are used as cutscenes, but even though this would have been cool back in the day, if you really wanted to watch a clip again, the game has a level select. You can just click on the level and rewatch the cutscene. Finally, the green crystals, of which there's only one per level, just unlock a model viewer and concept art. I mean, I get it, it's about the journey, but at least give me some gameplay or narrative reason why I should care at all about any of the collectibles in this collectathon platformer. Anything would do. There's also no puzzles to speak of, just key hunting, but the game is more or less linear as well, so again, not a whole lot of engagement to be found there. One of Atlantis' biggest issues is that Milo is painfully overused while the other characters completely fall by the wayside. I literally used Mole's abilities twice in the entire game. Twice! And Audrey, Vinny, and Keto weren't much better. Yes, Milo's the protagonist, but what makes Atlantis a fun film is the eclectic cast of wacky characters, hardly any of which you get to play as in this game. Now, I don't want to make it sound like Atlantis is completely irredeemable. For starters, the presentation is really on point. The aesthetics do an outstanding job of evoking the source material, especially the color and line work. Plus, and let me know if I'm off base on this, but it seems to be fairly graphically impressive for the hardware and year of release. The score also stands out in some instances. It does share the same composer as the movie, but I don't know if it's the exact same soundtrack, or if he wrote new music for the game, and frankly I can't be arsed to check. The game also retains every cast member from the film aside from Michael J. Fox as Milo, but his stand-in still does an excellent job. And as mentioned previously, it has a fair number of lengthy clips from the film. That said, the only real highlights of the game were the 3 set-piece levels that helped to break me out of my boredom-induced coma, including a solid boss fight against the Leviathan and a fun Crash 3-style vehicle level. Despite those strengths, the dreadfully monotonous gameplay drags this game down so far that it hardly even matters. I could see a kid who was a big fan of Atlantis and, doesn't know any better, absolutely adoring this game. But for me, the question I was left with at the end was, why would I play this when the Game Boy Color version is exactly the same game, but 10 times better? I'll give it a generous D, and honestly that's just because Kida is my favorite Disney princess. Shut up! I don't care if she's not official, she's an actual princess, which is more than Cinderella, Belle, and Mulan, by the way. She's a princess, she's in a Disney movie, she counts. Stop gatekeeping. But yeah, if not for Kida, I wouldn't have finished the game. BattleBlock Theater is okay, I guess. It has good game feel, some cool mechanics, and it's a decent length, but at the end of the day, I just didn't have all that much fun with it. A lot of that comes down to the tone, I think. I've hardly ever wanted to wring the neck of a narrator so badly. Listening to him attempt to be funny with lol so random Newgrounds writing for minutes on end during the very long cutscenes made me contemplate my mortality. And you don't even get a reprieve during the actual levels, which are filled with his constant chatter. The soundtrack, that I can only describe as wacky with jazz hands, didn't help the situation. It only served to even further hammer in the tedium. The game also runs out of ideas relatively quickly, and the back half just feels like you're retreading old ground. Probably its biggest design sin, though, is that in multiplayer it always respawns you on your teammate's position regardless of what checkpoints you've hit, which constantly erases large amounts of progress, and makes some of the later levels a real pain in the ass when you have to do large portions of the level all at once. It's a serviceable game, nothing more, and even though I was playing it with my best friend, I still felt like I was straining myself every time I played it for more than half an hour. I think this is one of those games like It Takes Two where my ranking is going to be a bit more swayed than usual by my personal enjoyment, so take this with a grain of salt, but I just can't see a world where BattleBlock Theater goes any higher than upper C. What, that's it? That's all I have to say about it? Kind of, yeah. BattleBlock doesn't do anything horribly offensive or particularly laudable. It's just a game that's fine, and I can't really get excited in either direction about a game that's just fine. It's frankly not possible to do justice to Black by talking about it, because nothing I could say would be better than just watching someone play the game for a few minutes. Black knows what it is, and what it wants to accomplish, and it says so right on the back of the box. Rule number 1, the guns are the stars. Merely switching weapons results in an elaborate, sexy animation, and reloading blurs everything but your weapon, telling you in no uncertain terms, look at this, this is what's important right now. But the real magic happens when you pull the trigger. The sound design in this game is, bar none, the best I've ever heard in a first-person shooter. This should actually be of little surprise to anyone, since Black was made by Criterion, famous for their mastery of audio in the Burnout series of racers. But it's insane how well they were able to transfer their skills to a military shooter. Every time you fire, it feels like your face is going to melt off Raider style, only to then be followed up by a series of explosions, crashing glass, and crumbling rubble that drives home the power you've just unleashed. You can blow up just about anything, which usually causes a chain reaction of explosions and destruction. The comically oversized weapon magazines also ensure that you hardly ever have to let off the trigger. This is the game that Michael Bay would make if he were a game developer. It's perfectly designed to make you feel awesome from start to finish. What really impressed me is the amount of reactivity to the environments. Walls get obliterated piece by piece, shell casings stay on the ground even after you walk away, windows shatter into pieces. Hell, there was even one time where I threw a grenade on top of a reservoir in the sewer, only for it to blow an enormous pillar of water sky high. The attention to detail on display is off the charts. No shooters were doing anything like this at the time. It wouldn't be until Gears of War and Battlefield 3 that we'd see anything even approaching this level of environmental interactivity. But even then, both games lack the craftsmanship of Black. It's truly miraculous what they were able to pull off on such meager hardware. This would all fall flat if the game controlled poorly, but thankfully the game feel is remarkably solid for a shooter of this era, especially from a dev with no FPS experience. Chris Tilton, who previously worked on Mercenaries, composed the OST, and though it's nothing mind-blowing, it punches well above its weight. The game also draws you into its setting, with intel pickups that reference real-world events and conspiracies. One that brought a smile to my face was a movement report for WMDs in Iraq. Now, it's only fair to mention that Black does have some shortcomings. It's only about 4 or 5 hours long, and with a mere 16 guns, including one-offs and special types, it could use just a couple more to round out the roster. The cutscenes, while they take themselves very seriously, are mostly just nonsense to get you to the next mission, and are unfortunately unskippable. The game also ends on a cliffhanger, which, for the one person that was paying any attention to the story, that being me, was a bit disappointing. The enemies can get fairly obnoxious with how ADHD they are, constantly moving around like a tween who just discovered Monster, which could make lining up headshots vexing. The penultimate bridge level should have just been reworked as well. This entire level consists of methodical shootouts with very little in the way of cover for you to push up into the enemy's face, which when paired with the inaccuracy of the weapons and minefield spam, makes for a level that's played at a snail's pace. The side objectives are also necessary gets to unlock the next mission for some reason, but thankfully on the normal difficulty you only need to find a few of them. Aside from those nitpicks, the game's only true flaw is that without a dome shot, the enemies take a lot of bullets to put away, and they only get more and more hardy as the game continues. In a game that does so much to make every gun feel weighty and powerful, their actual efficacy is wanting. This is then amplified by the lack of ammo in some areas, which could make you think twice about shooting, something that this game in particular should never make you do. Overall though, Black holds up incredibly well, and for its few faults, it's still one of the most fun and unique shooters out there. I just wish we could have gotten an actual sequel, because the saying is true. Once you play Black, it's hard to go back to other shooters. Black is going in the A tier. I'll probably catch a bit of flack for this one, but that's not terribly surprising. It's no secret that I think open-world games are, with rare exception, completely superfluous wastes of time and resources that are antithetical to game design and accomplish almost nothing that couldn't be achieved by a semi-open world. Not to mention their absurd oversaturation in the games industry for the last 10+ years. It's a funny coincidence, then, that Bully's best strengths are its unique qualities. A GTA-like set in the roughest high school in the nation is an intriguing premise, one that can deliver on different characters, themes, and mission structures than you'd see in your typical crime 'em up, and that's where this game delivers. The various wacky characters you'll meet along your climb to the top of the school are stereotypical caricatures of the same wastes of air you remember from your own halcyon days. While the game's various clickmates and teachers are almost universally unlikable, which can get a little draining, the willingness to go completely over the top with practically every character you meet gives the experience a silly, charming tone that few other games can pull off, save perhaps the Yakuza series. Charm really is the name of the game here. Bully is rarely outright funny, but befitting of the setting, it has an irreverent wit that will frequently get you to at least crack a smile. The missions also provide a good variety as you prank, lie, steal, and fight your way to the top, with all kinds of childhood antics to get involved in, from egging houses to stuffing kids in lockers, attending classes, working odd jobs, and fighting off the occasional elf horde, along with some minigames like bike races, go-karting, and even a fairly competent Wipeout clone to play at the carnival. It does, however, focus a bit too much on hand-to-hand fighting, which can get stale towards the end of the game, in spite of Jimmy's decently sized moveset. The soundtrack is also a standout element, which is a critical piece for an open-world game to nail, since so much time is spent on mundane traversal, but some tracks are also painfully overused, especially the main theme. What often lets the game down is the overall lack of polish. Moving Jimmy around is incredibly jank. He'll frequently run in a random direction that you aren't pressing, or get stuck jogging in circles for a few moments. Something about the way the thumbsticks are programmed is just bugged, because this oversight also made Shop Class practically impossible to complete. I've heard this complaint from others as well, so I know it's not just my controller or disc. The game also runs quite poorly. I was having near constant frame drops throughout, and this on the supposedly remastered version of the game. I'd hate to think what the original runs like. What really drags the game down for me, though, are twofold: the gameplay and the story. The classes are barely more than QTEs, aside from the absurdly hard English class. Seriously, maybe I'm just awful with anagrams, but I've also seen a common sentiment online that this class is something you should just look up a guide for. But aside from English, maths, geography, and biology, which are a bit more involved, the classes are dreadfully boring. And the same is true of pretty much all the missions. With mechanics this basic, enemies and objectives this easy, and little to no level design to tie it all together, with few exceptions, every mission in this game is a snorefest. Now, I get it, GTA-type affairs are made for casual gamers and kids, and my games literacy is simply too high for me to find a whole lot of enjoyment in games like this any longer, but still, it's difficult for me to see anyone but a bright-eyed newbie having a blast with Bully's minute-to-minute gameplay, as even other GTA clones from the era provide much more engaging mechanics and missions. This is exacerbated by the near-complete lack of a narrative after Act 1. Spoilers, I guess, but honestly, who cares? The plot is the last thing that makes this game worth experiencing. Once you're betrayed by Gary, he disappears into the ether for the remaining 4/5 of the game, only returning in the very last mission where he has, somehow, some way, turned the entire school against you, despite you being the king of the school and the most beloved person in the place. I guess he's just that good of a manipulator, or whatever. I'm absolutely baffled that people find Gary to be a memorable villain when you don't even see him, and his presence is entirely irrelevant for the vast majority of the game. Outside of Gary's off-screen antics, the only real plot, though I'm stretching the meaning of the term so far that Mr. Armstrong would be proud, is the random setups for missions to get the clicks on your side. Just your standard, go here, do this, and we'll pay you. Which reminds me, aside from the very cheap clothing, there's nothing to spend your money on in the entire game. which means that by the end of the school year, Jimmy will be so loaded for a 15-year-old that he makes the affluent preppies look homeless. I also don't know why they even included a reputation meter for each click when there's no way to actually affect it, but I'm getting off topic. This near total absence of a narrative or character development, combined with the elementary gameplay, complete lack of challenge, and so much time spent on traversal meant that I was more than ready for this game to be over by the time the credits rolled. Bully's a decent enough game for the time, but very overhyped, unpolished, and somehow both overambitious in some areas and underambitious in most others. Past the opening few hours, I was struggling to stay engaged or have any fun. Does its unique premise and charm factor make up for that? Not really. It's a game that perfectly encapsulates the pathetic standards of the average modern gamer. I don't play games to merely be distracted by them. I play games because I want to be entertained by them. If you're the opposite, give Bully a go, but at this stage, it's difficult for me to not feel like I'm just wasting my time with a game like this. Low B tier. There's a good chance you haven't heard of Cold Winter unless you've gotten pretty deep into some PS2 Hidden Gems videos, and that's probably for the best. All round, it's a strikingly average FPS. The OST is good, but nothing amazing, and it overuses some tracks. The sound design is okay. The narrative, despite being written by a fairly acclaimed comic writer, is merely passable for a 6th-gen title. Although the game feel isn't atrocious, it's still not very good. The aiming is fine when you're just going from side to side, but any diagonal movement at all will be extremely sluggish. The movement is also unbelievably floaty. Think CSGO times 3 or 4. Having such insane momentum feels like you're constantly lagging almost, and it does a lot to throw your shots. It also has a solid physics engine that it does almost nothing with, so its only real purpose is limiting the frame rate a bit. And trust me when I say it didn't need any help in that arena. For the most part, the game was chugging along in the low 20s, but occasionally you'd get some really harsh drops when there's a lot going on, especially in the final level. The game's aesthetics are fairly average, both in fidelity and art design, but it does have some cool effects, like smoke coming out of bullet holes and leaving behind bloody footprints after trekking past a corpse. On the other hand, the level design couldn't be more unambitious. I was actually happy when there was a turret section to break things up. There are a decent amount of guns, but the campaign doesn't pace them out properly. There's only a few weapons in the opening hours, and then many are just used as one-offs. And some aren't even available in the campaign, to my knowledge. The game is also absurdly easy. I didn't even come close to dying once. I'd usually put an asterisk on this point because I'm such an experienced console shooter player, but even with that context, I think most people would find Cold Winter unchallenging. Despite needing to loot them off of bodies, which really slows down the pace, ammo and armor are bountiful, and you can heal whenever you want with no consequences. It does have a long animation to it, but it can be cancelled. On top of that, enemy bullets and explosions hardly do any damage at all, while the opposition themselves do little but stand in the open, miss most of their shots, and wait to die. The only remotely dangerous enemy is the flamethrower guys, who are aggressive and literally melt through your health and armor in seconds, but there are maybe 10 of them in the entire game. They never come back after the mission they're introduced in. Despite getting some suppressed weapons and supposedly being more a spy than mercenary, stealth is completely impossible in this game since guards will see you from miles away with their backs turned. It also has exploratory elements that are pretty pointless. Sometimes you get a new gun or extra ammo for your efforts, but most of the time it's just a bunch of useless intel that doesn't even flesh out the world or story. For whatever reason, I also got a D rank on almost every mission, even while killing every enemy, completing close to every side objective with high accuracy, and of course, no deaths. Felt like I was playing Ghost Babel again. I don't know what's going on with that. Cold Winter also has a strange lack of polish. The music cuts out so that characters can talk, which is pretty jarring, and there's a lot of your typical PS2 jank and poor show. For all its faults, the game does at least have a couple strengths. One of the few more unique ideas is that you can knock over desks and other objects to use as cover, which is a cool addition and works quite well. But probably the only real memorable aspect of this game is that it was surprisingly gory. Reminiscent of Soldier of Fortune, you can blow off limbs and shoot people's heads clean off, all with accommodating screams, jibs, and spurts of gooey goodness flying every which way. Even in FPS games, you don't see this level of carnage very often, so maybe this game is worth giving a try just for that, but again, aside from the gore, it completely fails to stand out. Overall, Cold Winter is truly one of the most dead-average FPS games I've ever played. I was almost literally drooling trying to get to the end. C tier. There's not really too much to be said about Endgame aside from the obvious. It's a Time Crisis clone. I don't like to use the term clone very often, as it's typically just a stand-in for a genre that we don't have a name for yet. In this case, though, it's a straight-up copy, clear as day. Bullets flash to let you know which will damage you, you go into cover to reload and dodge shots, there are slower projectiles that will always do damage, there's enemies with riot shields, melee enemies, multiplayer, and all the rest. So the real question is it a competent clone? In some ways, yes. It's got a solid length, good enemy and location variety, the soundtrack isn't bad, even if it's a bit on the shorter side, and it's reasonably functional, though it does take a second to dial in the GunCon 2. I needed to aim a bit up and to the right while calibrating. I've heard the GunCon 1 works a lot better with it, but unfortunately I don't have one yet. Where Endgame falls flat on its face, however, is Time Crisis' biggest strength, the presentation. Rail shooters are typically graphical showcases, and this is something that Namco has always excelled at, especially with Time Crisis. But Endgame's looks are what I would expect out of a later PS1 title, and the cinematography is as bare bones as it gets. There's also plenty of poor show to be had. The audio mixing completely drowns out the music and dialogue, and there's a loading screen every few minutes, which are brief but do a lot to break up the pace. The cutscenes also cut off in weird places and seem kind of pointless a lot of the time. Mostly they're just brief interludes of Jade walking from place to place like this is some kind of avant-garde student film. This genre has never been known for its compelling storytelling, but I mean, come on, at least give me some dialogue or a bit of action or anything, really. The game's only truly frustrating aspect is that compared to Time Crisis' requirement of good enough, Endgame demands pinpoint accuracy out of you. If the bullet hitboxes had been just a little bit bigger, then it would have significantly improved the game feel. But probably what I missed the most from Endgame's inspiration is the weaponry. Jade only has a single gun, a Desert Eagle with 6 rounds, which of course leads to monotony, and makes the late game bosses feel even more bullet spongy than they already are. There are other weapons, but they're all unlockable secrets, and to my knowledge can't be switched between on the fly. Speaking of secrets, despite having completed the game's story, I didn't unlock any of these weapons, since for some absurd reason, story mode and arcade mode, whatever the hell that means, they're both exactly the same, are treated separately in the leaderboards and with the unlocks, so you have to beat the game once just to unlock the real game. Aside from the main campaign, there's also a separate in-universe light gun game to play. It lasts less than 10 minutes, but it's a nice little add-on, and there's also an additional training mode for said light gun game, which is about as long as the main game. I really like the narrative implication that Jade has the skills to save the world by gunning down hundreds of trained killers because she's a light gun game devotee. Endgame also has a true ending if you beat it in under a certain amount of time, but hell if I'm ever going to take the time to learn the game to that degree. No one is sure what the exact time is, but my in-game time was 30 minutes 11 seconds, and I didn't get it, and the only footage of the real end I can find, the guy beat it in 25:18, so somewhere in between there. Which kind of makes me think I might have just missed it by 11 seconds. Typical. It only took me 2 tries to beat the main campaign, but that's underselling it. It really pushed me to my limit. I'd say the difficulty is just right for a game of this type. Okay, so I guess there is a bit to say about Endgame actually, but the real question is it worth playing? And honestly, as is the case with many clones, you should just go play the original instead. If you have every Time Crisis memorized to the point of monotony, then maybe you could give it a go, but I think your time would be better spent bashing your head into a wall until you forget what a wild dog even is, and then play the series again. All that said, it's a decently competent light gun game in the comfort of your own home, and if only due to my disturbing level of affection for this genre, I can't be too hard on it. I'll give it a B-. Oftentimes, games fail for a number of unpredictable reasons, but sometimes a game is just fundamentally a bad idea. Such is the case with the first Onimusha. If anyone with any design chops was working on this project, they would have retooled it at the conceptual phase, but somehow this game made it all the way to market without anyone raising a hand in protest. So why was Onimusha inherently flawed? Well, let's explain what the game is for the uninitiated. Onimusha is an attempt to take the classic Resident Evil formula, tanky controls, fixed camera angles, claustrophobic environments, limited resources, and saving opportunities, then make it a hack and slash where the protagonist, Samanosuke, takes on demonic forces in Sengoku period Japan. My problem lies with the combination of fixed camera angles and fast-paced hack and slash combat. Now, that might be a confusing statement since the combination thereof works perfectly well in games like God of War, but there is a key difference here. Whereas God of War's camera is positioned to give you a large overview of the battlefield and doesn't change perspectives during the action, Onimusha's camera is, again, akin to Resident Evil. Due to the narrow passageways of Inabayama Castle, the camera only shows a small portion of each room at a time, and when you're moving through an area, the camera switches perspectives constantly. This isn't a problem in Resident Evil for two reasons. First is that the enemies are fairly slow, which gives you time to register their presence and to make a plan for how to deal with them. Instead, the enemies of Onimusha are often extremely quick, and frequently lunge at you from off-screen before you're even aware that they've spawned. Second, and far more importantly, when fighting enemies in Resident Evil, you are shooting a weapon from a stationary position, rather than engaging in fast, frenetic sword duels. Onimusha being a hack and slash means that the camera will be changing perspectives constantly while you're trying to engage an enemy, sometimes twice within the same combo or dodge attempt, which beyond being disorienting, frequently results in you missing your attacks or getting hit by attacks that you couldn't possibly see coming. Well, just position yourself better, you might say, and in any other circumstance you'd be correct. But that's far easier said than done when it seems like the majority of camera angles in the game were designed specifically to obstruct your view of the action. As opposed to its forebear, which usually takes high vaulted angles or isometric shots, Onimusha's camera likes to take angles that leave you entirely unable to see what's going on, such as perspectives from the floor that are solely taken up by a demon's fat cakes as you get slashed to death by the guy in front of him. This alone would make for an incredibly frustrating combat experience, but unfortunately, this is just the beginning. Your defensive abilities are your classic dash, block, and parry. The dash tends to be the best of these options, but given that many enemies have wide sweeping attacks, you'll mainly just be using this to dodge backward and then back in for a follow-up attack. The block is almost entirely useless since Samanosuke staggers incredibly easily, especially when facing multiple opponents or a single powerful one, not to mention many attacks are flat-out unblockable, though you wouldn't know it until getting hit by them. Finally, the parry is the high-skill, high-reward option. And yet, for the life of me, I could not get the parry to work except on certain low-level enemies. I've been told you should parry at the apex of their swing, I've been told to parry right when a strike is about to hit you. I tried every different timing I could think of, and yet nothing. Not once could I pull off a parry on most enemies, not even by accident, which should happen fairly frequently since the parry button is the same as the attack button. I don't know if certain enemies or certain attacks are unparryable or not, but it certainly seems like it. Plus, I do know that this function is entirely disabled for boss fights. There are some enemies that I could eventually parry, but doing so seemed to be pure luck. Most enemies also attack extremely quickly and with very tough to discern windups, which would make parrying absurdly difficult even if I could figure out how to do it. By comparison, I was playing through the Souls trilogy at the time and had no difficulty parrying whatsoever. There are also apparently two different types of parries, but don't ask me how they work. Frankly, it's almost impossible to find any information on this game's mechanics, since the manual is practically worthless in this respect. There are next to no in-game tutorials, and every guide you can find online is either for warlords or seem to be consistently contradicting each other. For example, to my knowledge, the parry is mentioned nowhere in the manual or in-game. I found out about it through I Finished a Video Game's Onimusha retrospective. Fantastic video, by the way. This lack of tutorialization, community support, and player feedback leads to many of this game's mechanics still mystifying me to this day, and it served to make the majority of my time with Genma Onimusha an exercise in sanity maintenance. After trying and failing to figure out the combat system for hours on end, I did the only thing I could to get through the game: magic spam. Now, I'm not sure if this was the intended strategy for beating the game or not, But at the very least, I can say that heavy usage of magic is encouraged through the gameplay systems in that you are almost always fighting against large groups of enemies, and the game gives you back magic for every enemy you kill, along with having a plethora of wells that fully and infinitely restore your magic reserves when standing near them. In comparison to liberal use of ogre magic, which is effective and plentiful, attempting to use just my sword on anything but the lowest rung of enemies feels like I'm playing the game wrong, and my attempts to do so in the early to mid-game only progressed my indignation rather than my save file. Now, if this game were incredibly easy like the original release, then these issues probably wouldn't even register, as you could just button mash your way through the game. However, this is Genma Onimusha. If you're not aware of this version of the game, it's a light remaster of the original Onimusha Warlords that attempts to course correct on some of the criticisms that the original release received. Chief among them being that the game was too short and that it was far too easy for a survival horror game. These complaints were addressed by adding an additional optional 40-level gauntlet to the game, and also by drastically ramping up the difficulty. This release was meant to serve as a definitive edition, and also as a far more challenging hard mode for veterans of Warlords, hence its name that roughly translates into Demon Onimusha. I'm sure this made sense in the heads of execs at the time, but given that this would require households to own both a PS2 and Xbox, and the majority of Warlords sales came solely from Japan where the Xbox was an abject failure, you can see why this version of the game is not just lesser known but downright obscure, with Capcom even opting to remaster Warlords rather than what was supposedly the definitive edition. The game is made more difficult in 3 ways. Changing up enemy spawns so that late-game enemies spawn in mid and even early-game areas, adding an invincible Nemesis-esque enemy that you have to avoid, and by ramping up enemy damage significantly, causing Samanosuke to die in a mere 2 to 5 hits depending on the enemy. This is on normal difficulty. There's also the addition of green mana, which, as I'll explain, serves to make the game even harder. I was not aware of the latter half of these changes. I only knew that this version had more content and looked a bit sharper, so it's safe to say I had quite the rude awakening when Genma Onimusha turned out to be one of the harder games I played this year, in a year that has been chock full of difficult games. Unlike the others, though, Genma Onimusha is hard for all the wrong reasons. On top of the already existing struggles of tank controls, which I'm typically quite good with, I was consistently having to fight the overly strong aim assist, which insisted on attacking the enemy closest to me, regardless of what I did on the controller. This is especially infuriating in a game where crowd control and target prioritization are paramount. For example, there are enemies that suck up the souls of the other enemies that you kill, and then those souls are gone, so if you don't target them first, they'll make fighting anything in the area entirely pointless. Problem is, they're tiny little buggers that float around in the air, so trying to get Samanosuke to swipe at them, all while being swarmed by the enemies I don't yet wish to kill, and then having him turn on a dime to attack one of the enemies behind me, made me want to tear my hair out. Oh yeah, the souls. You have an ogre gauntlet that allows you to absorb the souls of demons, and then use the energy to power your magic, upgrade your magic levels and items, or get health back, depending on the color. To do this, you have to stand still and hold down the A button to suck up the souls into the gauntlet. Problem is, this takes an extraordinary amount of time, leaves you completely vulnerable, and if you don't do it, all the soul orbs disappear within a matter of moments, so you have to constantly be juggling trying to grab souls while fighting enemies at the same time. This works well in boss fights when there are lulls in the combat, but in your typical Genma Onimusha battle, you're going to be swarmed with enemies that never give you a chance to breathe. This is made even worse by the addition of the large green orbs in the Genma version. Sometimes enemies drop these large green orbs which you can absorb to fill up your meter. Once you have 5 of them, you can use your ogre power to make you invincible, fill up your health, and give you a damage boost for a few seconds. Sounds overpowered, right? Well, the downsides more than balance it out, because not only can you suck them up, but the enemies can too, which gives them increased damage and health. You can stop them from doing this by engaging in a tug of war, where you mash A to try and grab the green orb for yourself. There are 3 issues with this, though. First is that they almost certainly have a leg up on you, since they will likely be very close to their now-dead friend, which often results in them sucking up the orb before you can even react to it, especially since you are likely still stuck in your buffered combo animation. The second is that, again, you are standing still and completely vulnerable while doing this. So even if you created distance beforehand, you usually have to break off the tug-of-war just to defend yourself, resulting in the enemy nabbing the orb. And third, the mashing is actually very hard. For reference, I'm the certified king of mashing, okay? I beat the European Extreme MGS2 button mash on the original release, the hardest button mash in video game history. I can vibrate my arm so fast it looks like a guitar string, and yet I'm still having trouble mashing hard enough to get these orbs before the enemy can retaliate. I want you to listen to this clip of me trying to win the tug-of-war against this archer, and see if you think this is reasonable for the average player. Again, this is normal difficulty. The same absurd level of mashing is also present when trying to escape from grabs or sword locks, which I didn't even know you could do until most of the way through the game, and some of which can 100-0 you, as is the case with the final boss. All this means is that you'll be fighting super-powered versions of these already doubly buffed enemies in almost every fight. That's not even the best part, though. Enemies can steal green orbs from you, not just when you get hit, which would at least be a more fair punishment, but whenever the hell they want. So not only is it very difficult to collect 5 of these orbs, which I should mention are the only reliable healing resource in the game since the consumable herbs are extremely rare, and the green souls you occasionally get from enemies only heal a tiny fraction of your bar, but enemies can also take them from you at will to power themselves up. In effect, these green orbs that were supposed to balance out the absurd difficulty of the Genma version only serve to make the game even harder, especially since the number of health items and green souls was likely reduced to accommodate for them. I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. Always playtest your game on the hardest difficulty, because that is the most efficient and effective way to pinpoint the defects in your game's design. If your game isn't fun on the hardest difficulty, it's probably just not very fun, and the lower challenge is serving as a band-aid for the game's unrefined mechanics. I say this because there's literally no way in hell people who had never played the game before playtested this game, played on normal, and didn't come back to ask if they were being pranked. Now, I know I've focused a lot on the combat here, but there's so much more to talk about. The story is Spartan and played out, the music, while of good quality, often feels comically out of place, the cutscenes don't have subtitles when played in Japanese, and the English voice acting is dreadful even for 2001. Due to some doors requiring a certain magic level, you'll likely have to spend some time grinding XP to progress. The game's idea of puzzles are locked boxes with sliding tiles that are usually mandatory. The Kaede sections are pointless time wasters except for one instance where you can get locked out of a very needed health upgrade for the rest of the game if you don't get it right then. The game boots you back to the main menu every time you die, Symphony of the Night style. The use of the A button as both the Soul Absorb and Interact button often causes you to enter doors when you aren't trying to, which robs you of all your hard-earned souls. This is actually the only control option that you can change in the menu, and yet they decided to give you objectively the worst control scheme by default. Finally, the game can sometimes lag when loading a new camera angle within the same room, and while it's not a constant problem, it's far from infrequent as well. On almost every level, Genma Onimusha is a tremendously unenjoyable video game. When Warlords came out, it was an easy game to like. It was a fresh take on the survival horror genre that could be enjoyed by more casual gamers, and while its faults were many, they could be forgiven due to the very low difficulty mitigating frustration. However, as soon as you ramp up that difficulty and add yet another incredibly poorly implemented system to boot, those small, ignorable cracks become gaping wounds that no amount of excellent presentation, solid Japanese voice acting, and a couple decent bosses could possibly make up for. I'll say this right now, I gave this game a lot of chances to change my mind. I played it for another few hours after my first playthrough, and still, I just can't see why anyone likes this game. If you're an Onimusha fan, please, write an essay in the comments. I want to know why you like this game, and what I'm not understanding about it. But as it stands now, I really dislike it strongly. Sorry guys, but Genma Onimusha is going into the lower D tier. After playing Infamous 1 for the first time a few years ago and really enjoying it, I thought now would be a great time to jump into the sequel, and Infamous 2 delivers just as much as its predecessor, but in different ways. While the writing is a large step down from our adventures in Empire City, the story and characters are still decent overall, and there's a lot of follow-through on plot threads from the original, which thankfully makes it feel like a full-fledged sequel. It also manages to end Cole's story in a satisfying way. What feels like a major improvement from the first is the powers. You have a litany of returning and new powers to acquire, and they each have a place in your arsenal depending on the enemy you're fighting and your own style. There are also new traversal powers that make getting from place to place far less tedious than in your typical open world. The first game's outstanding soundtrack also makes a return, but they've outdone themselves for the sequel. Infamous 2 is a competent follow-up to a game that I already liked a lot, and even most of my negatives are smaller issues that could have made an already excellent game even better. The boss enemies are pretty much universally just annoying, tedious bullet sponges. Worst of all is the Ice Titans that the game starts spamming toward the end. The Hive Lord also stood out in a bad way. It dives underground far too often, which results in you wasting a lot of your charge as your explosives go off with no effects due to their iframes. Which can be said for a number of enemies actually, but the Hive Lords are certainly the worst in that respect. Most basic enemy types are just palette swaps from the first game, which is a problem that Infamous 1 already had. Even so, it feels like there are fewer unique Conduit enemies. They could do so much more with people that can have any power you could imagine. But like the first game, most enemies you fight are just dudes with guns. The Ice Soldiers are definitely a nice mix-up, I just wish there were more foes like that. As far as the story goes, spoiler territory here for a minute folks, feel free to skip to the timestamp on screen. The fight against Bertrand, despite the game trying to play it up for all it's worth, doesn't feel climactic since we already fought him halfway through the game. Just take that first fight out, have Cole get incapacitated in a cutscene or something, and then Bertrand goes on a rampage, and when we fight him at the end, it'll actually feel epic and built up to, which could possibly outweigh how underwhelming the actual fight is. The Mercy Kill mission, where you have to kill the friendly Ice Titan, also loses a lot of potential gravitas. It would have been so much better if he had turned on you during gameplay in the previous mission, but instead Lucy just calls you up and says, "He's evil now, go take him out, huh?" Aside from those nitpicks, I have two major issues with the game. One of the story and one for gameplay. The first is that all of the morally bad missions are pretty much just, let's go destroy everything and kill everyone because I'm evil and power mad, lol, ew woo. There are a few bad choices that aren't purely evil, but it's mostly just doing really messed up stuff for no reason. In complete contrast to the first game, there's no moral ambiguity here. Just one side is completely selfless and the other is purely malevolent, KOTOR 1 style. In order to have interesting moral decisions, the evil choices need to be sexier, but ultimately wrong. They should be easier to do and give you more rewards for doing them. Not to mention be justifiable in the narrative because the beast is coming and you need to get as powerful as possible as quickly as possible. But then they should still send Cole down a dark path. Thankfully they did a slightly better job of this during the defining choice of the game. Also, in relation to the evil missions, Nyx's character just needed a lot more workshopping. She really doesn't have any redeeming qualities, and saying her personality is inconsistent would be an understatement. First she's gung-ho, let's go fuck everything up for no reason, then she wants to kill the beast because he killed her pet monsters and also because he's too powerful, but it's really just because she'll lose most of her power in a world with only conduits. Her motivations and purpose within the story are just really sloppily written. Lucy's turn at least makes a bit more sense, but that's not saying much. I'm really supposed to believe that a hardened, all-business government agent is going to crack under pressure just because she's afraid to die? At least give me some sort of setup for that. And no, her earlier torture does not count. My second issue with the game is the lack of mission variety. Infamous 2 is very combat-focused throughout, and doesn't do a lot to break up the monotony with other mission types. It gets draining, especially in the extremely combat-heavy final chapter. It needs more missions like Overcharge, Blast Shard Bomber, etc. Hell, there are no timed missions or races in the game, that would be a good place to start. Like I said though, most of my negatives are really just nitpicks, but there is one aspect of this game that really pissed me off, and it's actually something that I predicted back in my original 360 collection video. It's getting very difficult and expensive to find a PS3 controller that can hold a charge anymore, and mine have kicked the bucket in that respect, meaning that I had to play while wired. Normally this wouldn't be a problem with something like the 360, because the dongle has a very secure connection, plus you have the option of wired controllers or batteries. PS3 controllers, however, have the famously flimsy mini USB for a port, which meant that my entire playthrough of Infamous 2 was constantly plagued by interruptions, and the game was rendered unplayable for often minutes at a time until I could luckily find a position where my controller would stop disconnecting. Now, is this the game's fault? Of course not. But Infamous 2 is unfortunately stuck on the PS3, and due to this, controller issues are going to color every PS3 exclusive in a poor light as time goes on, especially games that are unplayable without 6-axis controls like Folklore and Puppeteer. For now, this problem can be staved off a bit with the use of a PS4 controller combined with the Brook Wingman XE2, but this is an imperfect and temporary fix. If you have a large PS3 library, I'd advise you start working your way through it now, because sooner than you think, these games are going to be rendered all but unplayable outside of emulation. And of course, that's to say nothing of the C-bomb that, to my knowledge, still hasn't been fixed on the PS3. Regardless, let's finish up here. In just about every way aside from the story and characters, Infamous 2 is a marked improvement over the original, but likely due to the short dev time, it doesn't feel like an enormous step forward for the series. That said, it's still one of the best superhero and open-world games I've played in some time, and it deserves to be experienced by everyone at least once. Infamous 2 is a lower A tier. LEGO Star Wars 3 sucks donkey dick. Hold on, let me start over. Anyone who worked on this game, I will find you. That's not quite right either. How about we keep it classic, huh? Fuck this game. When I first finished the story of LEGO Clone Wars back in 2023, I said this: I'm really glad I didn't try to complete this game either. Well, guess what I did? Why don't I ever just listen to myself? Fully completing this game made me realize that despite giving it a C-, I was way too kind to it. So I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm re-ranking LEGO Star Wars 3. Remember those ground assault levels that I called the antithesis of fun in my original ranking? Well, there's only 6 of them in the main story, and that was enough for them to ruin the entire experience. Guess how many you have to do to complete the game? Go on, guess. What, like 8, 12? At least 32 of these motherfuckers. And that's just the baseline, because to get the achievements, you have to control every planet as the Republic at one time, and then every planet as the Separatists at one time, which for me, added another 8 onto that. Combine that with the base game, 46 shit-sucking missions worth of the most garbage, dysfunctional, frustrating, tedious nonsense you've ever played in your life. Oh yeah, not to mention, they're timed! Just in case you thought it wasn't bad enough. Thankfully, I got a tip about halfway through that you can use the Super Speeder Red Brick to destroy silver and gold objects, as well as command posts if you're persistent, which really quicken the pace. That's not even the half of it though. The more I played the game, the more problems kept coming up. The minikit detector is broken. The ship aim assist is completely non-functional. Half the game is gatekept by acquiring Robinino, and due to color blindness combined with terrible level design, I couldn't even find out how to get him. The camera is worse than Sands of Time. Your character constantly goes rogue and attacks shit you're not aiming at. Moving things around with the Force just refuses to work. When I discovered the Dark Side missions, I was ecstatic. Awesome, there's a whole nother Dark Side campaign to play through? Nope, 2 tiny missions. Go fuck yourself. Also, and I know this is a subjective thing, but the humor in this game is just horrible. Featuring hilarious situational comedy such as, "Hey guys, don't teenage girls talk a lot?" A joke so funny, they had to do it twice in the same mission. It also made my 360 crash 8 times. My 360 has never crashed in-game, not once. 8 fucking times. I could probably sit here and list 100 things wrong with this excuse for a game. I mean, the only way they could release something in this state is if 98% of their resources were tied up with Pirates of the Caribbean and Harry Potter, because there was just no justification for this. If I wasn't certifiable already, LEGO Clone Wars got me there. This game is the absolute worst. Any fun whatsoever that I had while playing it, you know, those 5 minutes of the 35 hours I spent with this game, was because of my attachment to the license, and absolutely nothing else. Even now, as I'm writing this, I love the Clone Wars show so much that I was still trying to make excuses for why it should maybe be a D- or something like that. But I haven't been this apoplectic about a game being so bad since Metal Gear Acid. And you know what? That tells me everything I need to know. Sub F tier. This should be a pretty quick one. Medal of Honor Heroes is some of the lowest effort I've seen put into a shooter. The campaign, though I struggle to even utilize the term, is a series of 15 missions that, aside from the final level, are very obviously just curated tours of the multiplayer maps. You either have flags to capture, sometimes permanently and sometimes in a King of the Hill or Domination style, or you have to eliminate a certain number of enemies. You also have side objectives to acquire, which are nearly always just intel pickups, but one time they mixed it up and gave you assassination targets, which are just regular dudes. Each level takes between 4 to 8 minutes depending on the number of objectives, meaning that this game is less than 2 hours long in total, probably closer to the hour-and-a-half mark. It's also horribly buggy, the controls feel like wading through quicksand, and the levels don't even have any music. I was playing this on an actual PSP, but unfortunately my nubbin started drifting again, and even recalibrating it wouldn't fix it, so I finished the latter half on emulation, which was thankfully a much smoother experience. It's my first time emulating the PSP, and let me tell you, if every other emulator was even half as functional and user-friendly as PPS-SPP, someone would need to pinch me. Regardless, Medal of Honor Heroes is a terrible game. It's not unplayable by any means, and if your only dream in life is to be able to kill the Third Reich on the go, then I guess you could give it a try, but there are much better World War II shooters on the PSP. Never mind, any other game. D-. If you've been around here for any length of time, you'll know that even if I absolutely despise a game, I still try to do my best to finish it. The reasons for this are threefold. First is that I barely used to finish anything. Back when I was a kid, I played probably more than 100 games, but I could count the ones I finished on less than 2 hands. This continued into my teens, where I had a really bad habit of playing a game for a few hours and then never picking it up again. So you could say I'm making up for lost time. Second is that I now care about playing games in good faith to the best of my ability, and the bare minimum standard for my personal definition of such should be to at least finish the thing. Lastly, I simply find it an enriching experience to play bad games. It helps me to better contextualize and appreciate the great games even more than I would have by balancing out the scales, so to speak. That said, there is, on occasion, a game that I just can't bring myself to complete. Thus far, it's been at a rate of 1 per year, and I'm happy to say I kept it up again this year. That, of course, brings us to Medal of Honor Infiltrator. I didn't finish this game. I got to Mission 4, Level 2 before throwing in the towel, and it was with good reason. While the graphics are above average and the amount of real-life footage is impressive for the GBA, pretty much everything else about this game is absolutely abysmal. It should be said, I grew up with this series, and I have a lot of affection and nostalgia for it. I was also really excited going into this game since I had heard great things about it. But like Jak 2, Infiltrator once again proves that gamers seemingly have no understanding of the disparate types of game difficulty. For example, a game can be hard because it has a perfectly implemented gradation of satisfying challenges, as in Celeste, or a game can be hard because it's terribly designed and poorly made, such is the case with Medal of Honor Infiltrator. This game should be studied for how to have insane difficulty, but for all the wrong reasons. The controls are unresponsive, the hitboxes are atrocious, enemies consistently shoot you around corners where you can't shoot back at them, enemies shoot you from buildings where you can't even see them. The game's aim assist only serves to screw you over, since rather than hitting any of the enemies, it will instead make you miss when you would have hit them without it. On top of all that, enemy turrets are invincible from the front, so if you decided to use a class without grenades, then have fun dying. Luckily, you'll probably have grenades on you, since the only class that's worth selecting at all is the M1 Garand, since it's a one-shot kill against most enemies. Why is this important, you ask? Because if an enemy gets a single shot off on you, especially if they have an SMG, they'll stun lock you with nothing you can do but stand there and take it while praying that they do less than half of your health bar, which is unlikely. This means in practical terms, you have to memorize every enemy spawn in this game and shoot them before they have a chance to react, or you're screwed. I say memorize because the camera is so zoomed in that you can barely see 20 feet in front of you, far less than your enemy's vision of course, unless you want to spend the entire game aims down sight, which was eventually what I was forced to do. If that wasn't bad enough, enemies can of course shoot 360 degrees while you're limited to the cardinal and ordinal directions. Every enemy is also pinpoint accurate, And I mean every enemy, including the Flak 88s, which will always shoot you before you can react unless you know they're coming, and the enemy bombers, which apparently drop a heat-seeking payload. You would think that you could see the shadow of their flight path and then run to the side of it, but nope, aimbotted and outsmarted. Nothing personal, kid. To make things even more frustrating, your lives don't reset between levels, meaning that you will often be stuck on the hardest level of a mission with a single life and no checkpoints. All this while having to listen to the painfully grating, repetitive, monotonous, and minuscule soundtrack. I could go on for a while, frankly. The unfair design of this game just never ends. Probably the only levels that were enjoyable were the FPS stages. Still pretty difficult, but at least they functioned and were fair, which is far more than I can say for the rest of the game. I remind you, I went in wanting to love it, and I gave it a lot of chances to change my mind. But Medal of Honor Infiltrator is complete garbage. One of the worst designed and most frustrating games I've played in recent memory. It's no wonder why this was the developer's first and last project. DNF. Of course, that's what I would have said when I wrote this a few months ago, but as I was making this video, I sat down to collect footage of Infiltrator. I started the game from the beginning and decided not to use the Garand and just go for the Thompson instead. I took things very slowly, used stealth a lot more than I had, and focused on suppressing fire, taking proper angles, and letting the enemies come to me while I laid traps for them. And you know what? I got back to the level I was stuck on relatively quickly. And whether it was luck, a new tactic, or a mix of both, I finally beat it after a few attempts. Then I kept playing, for more than 2 hours. Finally, after a grueling final boss, it was over. I finished Infiltrator. So now that I've come back to it, played it all the way through, tried out some tactics I was neglecting beforehand, has my perspective changed? Was I just not understanding the game and playing incorrectly? Were the last few levels so good that it makes up for the game's faults? Do I see Infiltrator in a brand new light? No, it's still dog shit. F tier. Ninja Gaiden 2 is a valiant sequel to the NES Classic in just about every way. It's a bit longer, there are some cool new powers which are used in interesting ways, it makes the wall climbing far less cumbersome, it takes out the overly punishing reversion to the beginning of the level if you die on the final boss, the environmental hazards add a new dimension to the levels, the design is generally a bit tighter, and the boss fights actually aren't all terrible. While I think the storytelling has taken a small dip compared to the first, and it feels like a bit of a retread, especially with the reappearance of Yakio, it's still enough to keep you engaged. I can imagine someone having the criticism that Ninja Gaiden 2 hasn't really evolved with the formula much, but I think there's just enough here that differentiates it from Ryu's first outing to justify a new entry. On the whole, Dark Sword of Chaos takes an already solid side-scroller and makes it even better. Ninja Gaiden 2 is a B+. Alright, I'm gonna say it. Warrior Within takes the mess of a game that was the Sands of Time, threw out everything that didn't work, which was almost all of it, plus a bit that did. It took what remained, iterated on it, and actually made a damn good experience out of it. I know, I'm just as surprised as you. By far the biggest upgrade is the combat system. Gon is back vaulting every enemy until they finally stop spawning 6 minutes later. Instead of a single sword, you now have an enormous variety of sub-weapons to pick up. While they mostly play the same aside from some statistical differences, this gives the prince a surprisingly large moveset of various combos and acrobatics. Enemies are far more varied than before, both in their combat styles and the manner in which they need to be defeated. There's also a number of boss fights that again require different tactics and approaches. All of this is presented at a near perfect level of challenge. Not grueling by any means, but just difficult enough to get you to sit up and pay attention. And it makes every enemy encounter increasingly satisfying the further you're able to master the prince's moves. Warrior Within made combat fun. And freaking Prince of Persia. It can't be overstated how big of an accomplishment that is. While there aren't too many new Dagger of Time powers, you do get a crowd control attack that was severely lacking in the first game. Warrior Within also fixes one of my other primary issues with the first game, the monotonous platforming. As compared to the brain-dead task lists of Sans, jump on pole, slide down pole, jump off pole to other pole. Here you have dangerous obstacles that actually take planning, timing, and skill, which then continually ramp up in complexity as the game goes on. This is exactly the type of difficulty that I wanted out of the first game that it just never delivered on. If Sands of Time is Assassin's Creed, Warrior Within is Mirror's Edge. There's simply no comparison. This movement really comes to the forefront during the Dahaka chases, which are almost always a desperate, sweat-soaked affair. If I had played this game as a kid, I couldn't even imagine the pants-shitting terror of being chased by this thing. The Dahaka is one of the most memorable supernatural villains I've seen in a game, and his presence, or the paranoia of such, is palpable throughout the course of the adventure. This of course pairs itself perfectly with the story that builds off of what little it could have from the first game. 7 years after Sands of Time, the Prince is a more balanced individual than the immature, pathetic, approval-seeking 22-year-old of the first game. We get to see a razor-focused side of the Prince, yet one who is still capable of compassion and contemplation. His time travel antics from yesteryear have drawn the ire of the Dahaka, the guardian of the timeline, who wants to set things right by killing the Prince. He in turn hatches a plan to stop the Sands from ever having been created in an attempt to sate the Dahaka. This gives our journey a far greater sense of urgency, as we are literally trying to outrun our fate, which, at least thematically, returns the series to its 2D roots of trying to rescue a princess before the clock runs out, fighting the inevitable in a race against time. All of this is punctuated by our occasional interactions with Kaileena, a servant of the Empress, which provide dramatic and romantic tension throughout. This is a narrative backdrop that, for a time travel story at least, actually makes some amount of sense, has its fair share of twists, and again, flawlessly intertwines with the gameplay. We journey to the Empress of Time's Bastille in order to stop her from creating the Sands. But to get to her, we first have to navigate her labyrinthine dwelling by traveling back and forth in time between the present rundown ruins to the shimmering halls of the distant past, both to make forward progress and dodge the Dahaka who endlessly hunts us. Unlike the previous Prince games, Warrior Within utilizes a semi-open world that slowly opens up for you the more you progress and the more powers you acquire. This, in turn, means that one of the game's weaker points is that the structure can lead to a lot of backtracking through the same areas, along with a general confusion about where to go, especially when the provided map is utterly useless. But as you continue playing, you quickly get a feel for the Empress's palace, and I stopped getting lost relatively quickly. Thankfully, Warrior Within does a lot to keep the experience fresh. You're always unlocking more abilities, finding new enemies to fight, and there's even a mid-game switch-up where you have unlimited sand to use, but your health drains constantly. This was absolutely awesome, until I realized you can't actually die from your health running out. It only drains to a certain point. As difficult as they made the rest of the game, it's a strange design choice to puss out when it came to this, and it made the whole situation less impactful than it should have been. Still damn cool, though. But it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. The tonal shift. Warrior Within traded Sands of Time's stylized fantasy aesthetic and Disney-esque adventure story for a heavy metal-filled romp with realistic graphics, gore, scantily clad women, and cursing. Obviously, I have nothing against this in principle, but this dramatic change to the identity of the series was one of the most contentious aspects of Warrior Within. This was of course part of a wider industry trend as well. Video games wanted to be taken more seriously, and as a result, we went through our edgy teenager years as a medium. Jak and Daxter went from colorful collectathon to drug-fueled GTA clone. Sonic went from let's learn about teamwork to let's kill the president. It was a weird time, and it's something you just get used to with games of this era. That said, let's be honest, this was awesome then, and it's awesome now. Get off your high horse and enjoy something, you prick. The real question is, was this a good change for the series? Frankly, probably not. Though the tonal shift wasn't as jarring as I was expecting given how it's spoken about, and even makes a fair bit of sense given the narrative, we lose basically all of the few things that Sands of Time actually got right. The cartoonized aesthetic is traded in for realism, which makes the already somewhat samey halls of the Empress's palace feel even more one-note, especially in comparison to the Palace of Azad, where every area felt unique and memorable. Warrior Within's music is dope as hell, just like the first game, and a lot of people forget that there was more metal and synth in Sands of Time's soundtrack than you would think. However, Sands was able to achieve a perfect balance between the heavy guitars and the Middle Eastern influence that created a variety of iconic tracks, which could be paired with almost any scenario. With the switch to almost pure metal, we've lost nearly all of that uniqueness, along with the setting itself. While I'd personally prefer to listen to Warrior Within's soundtrack in isolation, I think it's a much worse fit for the series. This is where the baby got thrown out with the bathwater. If they had kept Sands of Time's aesthetics and music and married it with Warrior Within's vastly improved combat, platforming, and narrative, we'd have a perfect game on our hands. And playing a game that is excellent, but could have so easily been amazing, is one of the most heartbreaking things for me as a gamer. Lastly, I just have some minor nitpicks to rattle off. 2 of the health upgrades, all of which are needed for the best ending, are probably just a bit too hidden. A different camera angle is all it would have taken to make them less obscure. The character models are just really poor for the year of release. The Golem boss is a bit overused. I think I fought him 5 times in total, which is too many. One of the other few redeeming features of Sans, that being the prince's narration, is also missing. You couldn't have the same retrospective gimmick as before because it wouldn't work with the narrative, but hearing just a bit more of the prince's old monologues to let us know where his head's at during various parts of the game would be nice. Other than those minor issues, Warrior Within still suffers a bit from being built off of the bones of Sands of Time. While the camera is thankfully far less erratic during combat, it still transitions a bit too frequently during platforming, the surprise of which can throw you off until you get used to it. The directional targeting still needs a bit of work, as you'll still occasionally swing at something you weren't aiming for, but it's nowhere near as bad as Sans. The game is also quite lacking in polish. It thankfully runs near flawlessly on the original Xbox, but there are a litany of audio bugs and poor show which drags down the experience. This is more than understandable if you know anything about this game's horrific dev cycle. The ghouls at Ubisoft HQ only gave them 13 months to complete the game, which also resulted in absurd amounts of cut content. What could have been? As it released though, as a total package, Warrior Within is easily my favorite 3D Prince of Persia thus far, and sets the high watermark for the series that I had expected from Sands of Time. Warrior Within is going in the lower A tier. Robotech Battlecry gives off a really strong first impression. The cel-shaded visuals evoke the aesthetic of the 80s anime perfectly. The game also retains all of the original music, which is of course fantastic, and it has the OG voice cast, though you won't be seeing too much of them outside of a few cameos because this is a side story that runs parallel to the original Macross saga. You step into the boots of Jack Archer, a mercenary pilot from the Unification Wars who is voiced by Cam Clark, which is pretty cool since Cam's very first role was the voice of Max Sterling in the Macross saga, and also Lancer in the New Generation. Also, in my head every time I kill a boss I hear, "A liquid!" So that's a big plus. The first few battles play out the same as the show until the SDF-1's Space Fold, where unlike Rick and crew, you get left behind to pick up the pieces of the aftermath. After those first 4 missions, it time skips all the way to the Malcontent Uprisings, which you spend the rest of the game trying to thwart, and that leads into the first major fault of the game. Most of the time your missions are going to revolve around defending a target, which leads to some monotony as you get further along, something that isn't helped by the barely existent narrative. Considering this game is secondary canon, you have a lot of wiggle room to do what you want with the story, but aside from the odd dramatic moment that's quickly forgotten about, there's very little plot to speak of. Thankfully, despite the absurd decision to go with tank controls and ignore the second thumbstick, the gameplay is still relatively smooth and both easy to pick up yet hard to master. It is lacking depth compared to other mecha games, but it remains fresh for the runtime. And trust me when I say that you'll have your hands full with how thoroughly you need to master your Veritex toolset to succeed. I can definitely see why I never got very far in this game as a kid, because Battlecry is absolutely brutal, dude. I was on normal difficulty, but I don't know how they expected kids to even beat the 3rd level. Especially once you get to Chapter 3, every mission is just teeth grinding and barely winning on the 8th try if you fly like a robot and get extremely lucky. Sheesh, man, Max Sterling himself couldn't beat this shit. One mission that especially stood out was CAT-Scan, which took easily over 25 tries. And of course, there are no checkpoints. Thankfully, each level is usually 10 minutes or less, so the numerous restarts aren't too taxing. A lot of these missions have a sort of trick for you to figure out, especially in regards to target prioritization. But even after learning that, the execution required is on the level of some of the tougher Ace Combat and Armored Core missions. Now, take that with a grain of salt. I'm by no means a genre vet, but this game really pushed me to the edge of my skill and sometimes sanity. I've never had a game make me scream to the heavens, "I'm just one man!" as often as this one. Some of the enemies like the male power armors and ground particle beam turrets are also just blatantly unfair. Not like a lot of the game, frankly. In addition to that, the sheer volume of enemies you're going to be up against, along with the lack of a second thumbstick that severely hampers your mobility, make for a very tough game. Unless you're a seasoned flight and mech sim player, trust me on this, park the difficulty on easy if you're hoping to have fun. Something that would have made the game a bit smoother that I didn't discover until after the end of the game, of course, is that you can have extra armor and missiles in the space missions, so make sure to equip it, because for whatever reason the game doesn't let you select your Veritech before each mission if you just continue. You have to quit back out to the mission select, and then choose another Veritech from there, which is just a baffling oversight. I guess the playtesters were so exasperated after completing each mission that they opted to take a break every time. If you can look past those faults, however, Robotech Battlecry is not just a surprisingly competent licensed game, but a solid, if a little basic flight sim in its own right. I'll stick it in the mid-Bs. Robotech Invasion is the video game adaptation of Robotech: The New Generation, a show that, even as a big Robotech fan, I hadn't seen until preparing to play this game. Let me tell you, not a great show. Solid 6 out of 10. Barely. And yet, this game is, by comparison, an insult to its source material. I have never been more bored playing a first-person shooter in my entire life. Let's start off with the basics. There are two enemy factions, rogue human gangs and the Invid. You spend maybe the first hour of the game fighting the humans, and then they're never heard from again. The other 5 hours are spent shooting the Invid, a species of aliens in exosuits that are absurd bullet sponges, except for the one tiny red eye somewhere on their armor. This red eye doesn't result in an insta-kill though, just a headshot, which depending on the Invid unit, take about 3 to 7 headshots to put down. This is made dramatically easier by being able to auto-lock onto the Invid. So the most aiming that you're typically doing in this game is just holding a slight tilt of the stick and waiting for the enemy to die. Repeat 1,200 times. This isn't helped by the drab visuals, lack of level variety aside from constant escort quests, and the complete inability to change into a motorcycle for the back half of the game. That's right, if you're unaware of this series, that's the gimmick. Your armor can turn into a motorcycle. But this is almost never used in any interesting ways aside from a dull Warthog run halfway through the game. Other than that, it's just a way to get from place to place during the early game. The first third plays out like a small open world where you drive from objective to objective, but for whatever reason, the devs decided that instead of having loading screens between areas, we should have these enormous tunnels that you have to walk through so that we can load the next area. You need to walk because you can't use your motorcycle indoors for safety reasons or whatever, even though they break this rule later on in the game. But this means that all you do during these tunnel sections is spam your boost until you finally make it to the other side and can continue on your way. It's like the devs saw into the future, saw the loading crags of today's games and said, "That's brilliant! How can we do that and make it 10 times as tedious and annoying?" Thankfully, that style of level is dropped entirely for the latter 2/3 of the game, which is a set of linear missions that have little, if any, relevance to the plot at hand. You'll slowly chew your way through hundreds of Invid before completing some nonsense objective, all to do it again the next time. Again, very little visual variation, very little change in mission structure, but very chock full of very hardy enemies. Despite trying to make differentiated enemy types, at the end of the day you fight pretty much every Invid the same way. Lock on, slight tilt of the joystick, and wait for them to die while dodging their lumbering projectiles. Repeat ad nauseum. But what makes this inconceivably worse is that this game essentially has one gun. Now, there are other guns, they make the pew-pews and whatnot, but very early on you get a gun that runs off of protoculture, which is what the Invid drop when they die, and this is the gun that you permanently keep in your alternate weapon slot. As well, the fewer and fewer human enemies there are, the less ammo there is for any other gun that you can pick up, which means, you guessed it, this is the gun you're going to be using throughout 85% of the game. As if the lock-on didn't already make every gun feel the same. This combination of factors, the non-existent level design, the monotonous objectives, the boring spongy enemies, and the single viable weapon, not to mention a general feeling of disconnectedness to the license outside of a few very brief cameos, come together to make Robotech Invasion an exceptionally lifeless experience. And not even Jesper Kid's soundtrack that slaps harder than a chimpanzee, or the plot that at least tried, I guess, could make this game anything less than painful to play. I can see why I never got anywhere in this game when I had it as a kid. I probably chose to do homework instead. Robotech Invasion is a D-. Silent Scope on the GBA is pretty much a straight port of the arcade game, or at least as good as they could do on the hardware. It controls alright, but the hitboxes can be a bit iffy, especially around the arms and legs. They did do well to translate the arcade game's bangin' OST to the modest GBA sound chip, which is one of the primary marks in its favor. Being that it's an arcade port though, even with 2 campaigns, it's an absurdly short game at less than half an hour long, and it's also incredibly easy outside of the stadium level. There is a difficulty slider, but it does nothing aside from reducing the already very generous timer. You can perhaps take my perception of the difficulty with a grain of salt because I'm playing on a monitor and I'm also insanely sick with it, but I don't think this game would keep the interest of many people. I really wish they'd implemented gyroscopic controls to at least attempt to mimic the arcade experience. As it is now, the speed of aiming with the D-pad, combined with the imprecision of, aiming with the D-pad, make it far too quick to line up successive shots, but at the same time, far too difficult to shoot with a very high degree of accuracy, making headshots a fool's errand. Silent Scope GBA is decent fun, but it's so easy and short that it's hardly worth the time it takes to boot it up. And given the D-pad aiming, going for high scores would be an exercise in frustration. It's going in the D tier. Soldier of Fortune isn't a series that's brought up very often anymore, even by FPS devotees. But upon release, it had sparked plenty of interest from gamers and controversy from the media. Building upon the base of the Quake 2 engine, its main selling point was its dismemberment system, which allowed for 26 regions of the body that could be blown off in differing ways. This made it one of the goriest shooters ever seen at the time, especially given that the enemies were real people, and gave the game a level of over-the-top violence typically reserved for grindhouse B-movies and Verhoeven films. This is a system that, with very rare exception, typically as parody, hasn't been implemented in modern games due to the shift to realism, which would be at odds with the cartoonishly explicit violence on display. This makes it something of an oddity and a product of its time. Soldier of Fortune is from a simpler age, where blowing bad guys' bodies apart in various ways was all we needed to be entertained. The story helps to facilitate this focus on action above all else, as you and the mustachioed mercenary John Mullins attempt to stop a group of neo-Nazis from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. This globetrotting quest takes you to a number of different locales that keep the visuals fresh throughout, and provides some interesting level mix-ups like fighting your way to the front of a train while being shot at by a helicopter, or having shootouts while trying to navigate an active meatpacking facility, all of which is enhanced by a suitably action-laden Y2K soundtrack. While they are a bit few, the weapons are all fun and effective to use, some feature a secondary fire mode, and all sound absolutely incredible. In particular, the Deagle has got to be my favorite iteration of the weapon in any game, and the Mini SAF and Spaz 12 are no slouches either. Some guns are a bit poorly paced out though. By the time you get the slug thrower and the microwave gun, the game is practically over. The visuals are also impressive for the time, with footprints left in the snow and bullet casings on the ground, and quickly allowed me to forget that I was playing a 25-year-old game. Soldier of Fortune isn't all sunshine and roses, however. There are 2 things that every FPS has to get right. The guns need to be fun to shoot, and the enemies need to be fun to shoot at, and to be shot at by. While Soldier of Fortune nails the former, the latter I think was only halfway there. All the time you'll see cool scripted moments of enemies jumping out of windows, rappelling from the rafters, blowing through walls, or any number of crazy ambushes to try and catch you out. But after that, they'll mostly just stand there and shoot at you. They tend to do very little once they've arrived on the scene. If you're gunning them down before they even have the chance to set up shop, then you probably won't notice this too much. But as soon as you slow down a bit, you realize just how flat and brainless the AI really is. Due to the gore system, the enemies are fun to shoot, sure, but they don't put up a terribly engaging fight, which is then added to by the game being quite easy on the regular difficulty, though there is a monstrous difficulty spike in the last few levels. I had quite the adventure trying to play this game. First, I started out on the Dreamcast port, which is widely considered to be superior to the PS2 version, and I have to say I was impressed with what they were able to accomplish. Aside from a couple mostly unimportant features like switching the hand you're holding your weapon in, the game was perfectly translated to the Dreamcast, but with a lot of caveats. There's no Rumble Pack support, which was a huge disappointment. The performance isn't terrible on the whole, but it definitely chugs in some areas like Siberia and Sudan. The control scheme is also quite limited by the hardware. It's far from ideal, but after an adjustment period it was still functional, and you do have full Dreamcast mouse and keyboard support if you want to go that route. For whatever reason, the stereo audio only comes out of one side, so I had to switch it to mono. The music is also nearly inaudible on the default setting, but all that is peanuts compared to the one fatal flaw of this port. It has frequent and long loading screens. They tend to last more than a minute and occur every 3 to 5 minutes. Now, I'm never bothered by loading screens in games because I'm not an ADHD gooner who's scared to death of being alone with my own thoughts for more than 5 seconds. I'm just a regular gooner. But these loading screens were too much even for me, and they really dampened the experience. All in all, I'm amazed that they were able to get the game running on the Dreamcast at all, especially in a playable state, but it's definitely not how the game should be experienced. As I said though, I only started the game on the Dreamcast. I had to switch to PC after I got an infinite loading screen about a third of the way through Sudan. I bought the game on GOG, but for the life of me couldn't get it to even boot. I did however find a fan site that has a community updated version of the game that ran perfectly outside of the odd graphical glitch. I'll link that in the description. Overall, with Soldier of Fortune, you get what you pay for. It looks good, sounds great, controls well, and it's good fun. It won't blow your mind to pieces, and it probably won't be remembered as a genre classic, but for FPS fanatics, it's more than worth a play. Soldier of Fortune is a B+. Star Wars Obi-Wan is such an inconsistent experience that it's difficult to even talk about. So often you can see sparks of creativity that are then promptly stamped out. The combat gives you more control over your lightsaber than ever before, by attaching different lightsaber swings to each tilt of the right stick. But the way in which you swing your lightsaber never really matters, which just leads to mashing as many attacks around as possible, and also ensures that the game feels outdated with tank movement. The level design occasionally throws some interesting challenges your way, both in platforming and combat, but then almost always devolves into the flat, samey hallways filled with the same repeating combinations of enemies not 30 seconds later. It even makes you backtrack through an entire previous level with no tangible changes. I'm also pretty sure I only ever used the crouch a single time, in the tutorial. The story seems like it wants to give some interesting backstory to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's relationship and adventures before Episode 1, but then separates us from Qui-Gon for nearly all of those early missions. And once we uncover what the Jin Ha are up to, Mace just says, "This is above your pay grade, Squirt. Let us handle it from here." Okay, thanks for that resolution. Maybe there were more levels planned, but the first 2/5 of the game just feel like a lot of build-up that goes absolutely nowhere. Which makes it even weirder that one of the 5 levels is Obi-Wan going on a side quest to save Padme's double Sabe after she's kidnapped off-screen by Tusken Raiders. Somehow. I mean, she was aboard the ship. Captain Panaka and Obi-Wan were just dozing off with the ramp down, I guess? The limited number of lives per level was also rather punishing for a game that was mainly marketed towards kids, especially with how easy it is to die on the platforming, and with the sheer amount of damage Obi-Wan can soak up in relatively little time. Considering this game was within the launch window of the original Xbox, the visuals are quite poor, with most levels and character models feeling unfinished. And aside from some good lighting effects on the lightsaber, it takes advantage of none of the vast horsepower the big black box was packing. And my god, the voice acting. If you can't get Ewan back to voice his most famous character, then you could at least do him the honor of getting someone that sounds like they're from the same continent. Star Wars Obi-Wan is truly half-baked in every single respect, and though it's better than Obi-Wan's other video game outing, that's a pretty low bar to clear. It's going straight to the bottom of the C tier. I played the first 2003 Turtles game on GBA a couple years ago and adored it, pretty much without qualification. It's an outstanding beat-em-up with brilliant graphics, a bangin' soundtrack, and super tight gameplay. Plus, the '03 show are the Turtles that I grew up with, and the nostalgia was hitting hard. So imagine my surprise when I boot up the second game, same dev, same designer, and instead of a beat-em-up, they've gone in the direction of a stealth-focused, side-scrolling platformer. Awesome, I thought. Finally, a Turtles game in a different genre, aside from that one crappy Metroidvania one for the 2013 show. At last we get some variety. Then you start playing it and you think to yourself, man, were the controls this sticky, inconsistent, and unresponsive in the first game? Then you fight your first few enemies and realize, wait, there's no way the enemies were this unfair in the first game, right? I can't even land a hit on these guys without having to duck back into hiding lest they smack me unavoidably. Plus the hitboxes are terrible. You keep playing. There sure is a severe lack of health in this game, considering every enemy bonks the shit out of you with nothing you can do about it. The platforming is getting really tough very quickly, too. It might be fun if the controls worked. Slowly but surely, over the course of the first 2 chapters, this game started to sour. More and more bullshit hitting me, more and more restarts through no fault of my own, just pure trial and error until you learn every single pixel of a stage, and somehow don't get hit through finding your own exploits. Thankfully there are some decent vehicle levels to break up the monotony, but you're just getting more bored and more frustrated as the minutes turn into hours. You have the realization while you're taking your 5th sip of a drink in the same minute that, holy shit, this game is like 50% just sitting still and waiting for the right patterns. Play 5 seconds, wait 5 seconds, play 5 seconds, wait 5 seconds. It's just barely enough time that if you look at something else for a moment, you'll miss your opportunity, so you have to force yourself to focus. Play, wait. Play, wait. It's like Chinese water torture. All this while a single mistake could result in you losing a third to half of your health bar. Effectively a restart. Then, oh boy, you get to the World 2 boss. A massive gladiator bounds across the screen with the greatest of ease. There's no running, no hiding, and certainly no laying hits on him without getting a hammer to the face for a fourth of your health. Then you notice a block you can break under the stage, but you can only do it with Mikey. The Turtles all have their own unique powers, but pretty much Mikey is the only one who's ever actually useful. Anyway, you restart, break the block, and finally you're safe from the onslaught. The gladiator rages and impotently throws bombs at you, but you've found respite in your hovel. Then he stays up top, so you carefully poke your head out. He jumps back down on top of you, but inspiration! That one time he jumps down is when he's vulnerable. You can jump up, put 2 hits on him, and back to your hole you go. You do this 15 times or so for maybe half of his health bar, and while hiding and waiting for his bombs to explode, you have an epiphany. Hold on. This is how you beat the boss? There's no other way? And you would be correct, because this is the worst designed game of all time. This is only World 2 of 5. You ain't seen nothing yet. It gets so much worse. I have never played a game less fun than this. I've played scant few games less functional than this. I've never played a game that required you to find as many exploits to merely play it as this. I've never played a game as frustrating as this. I've never seen enemies as poorly designed as this. I've hardly ever played a game as boring as this. I've never played a game as unfair as this, and by God, I've never rage quit a game so many times, or indeed so quickly, in my life. I mean, I must have had to walk away from this game at least 10 times. 3-hour game, by the way. I dreaded every time I even thought about picking up the controller. It took me multiple months to finish this game because I just didn't want to play it. I haven't been so tempted to stop playing a game since Jak fucking 2. But you know what? I already quit a game this year, and I really didn't want to quit another. Plus, I love these Turtles. This was one of the main shows I watched growing up. I had the DVD sets, the action figures. I was Leo for Halloween. They didn't have Donnie, objectively the best turtle, fight me. I mean, I kind of felt like I owed it to them, I guess. I don't know. But this game, this thing, is so bad it hurts me to know that it exists. I don't know, man. I don't know what else to say. Like, I could, for hours, pick this game apart, little by little. But I don't want to. I want to wash my hands of it as soon as possible. If you really want to see if it's that bad, play it. I'll put a link in the description. But this game has been hanging over me for so long that I just don't even want to think about it anymore. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus on the Game Boy Advance is, as of now, one of the top 10 worst games I've ever played. And the only reason I forced myself to finish it is because I had already DNF'd Medal of Honor Infiltrator, and I didn't want to quit another game this year. Lesson learned, don't burn your bitch out card early, because it can always get worse. Also, I think I've discovered something. I have devised the #1 foolproof, quickest way to know if a game is terrible, alright? Here it is. If the long play of a game isn't just a fairly casual playthrough, but instead it's some nuts speedrunner who knows every single pixel of it and is using all manner of exploits and shit, that is absolute proof positive that the game is unplayable. This has happened 4 times now. X-Men the official game on GBA, Marvel Ultimate Alliance on GBA, Medal of Honor Infiltrator, and this game. I don't know what it is about the GBA that shits out some of the worst games ever made, but it's becoming a really strong pattern. Anyway, Battle Nexus is an F. Also, and this goes for Onimusha, Infiltrator, and every other game that's generally liked but I rated poorly. Every time there's a game like this that I rank low, I know there's going to be someone who says, well, I played this game as a kid and I think it was good. They probably won't even get that far though, they usually just dislike the video and then roach out. First of all, you didn't even finish Battle Nexus or Infiltrator, because no one did. They're fucking impossible. Second, anyone who wants to prove me wrong, I dare you. I fucking dare you. Stream yourself playing one of these games, normal difficulty, finishing it, and actually having fun. I'll watch the whole thing. And hey, maybe you'll succeed. Maybe your standards really are that low, or maybe I just don't get the game, and you can show me why I didn't like it. I'd love for that to happen, legitimately. But don't complain about a ranking if you don't want to put your money where your mouth is. I don't care if you played the game 15 years ago, or you heard from someone else that it was good. Actually play it, and then you can call me an idiot. Not a fake, though. That's another comment I've gotten on these ranking videos. I have never, nor will I ever, say something I don't genuinely believe. I'm not parroting other people's opinions, and I'm not being contrarian. The general consensus on a game isn't something I factor in very much. Yes, I really enjoyed Dead Man's Hand and Arabian Nights, and yes, I actually think Jak 2 and Sands of Time are terrible games. If you can't at least accept that much, then what are we even doing here? If you don't agree, that's fine. Ideally, you should disagree with me fairly often. We're individuals, we value different things, we should disagree. I promise it's okay. But these are my actual opinions that I spend a lot of time considering. I really try to be as fair as possible and play games in good faith. But if I still hate a game, I'm gonna say I hate the fucking game. And I don't care if you like it or not. That's not really going to change my opinion unless you can come up with some compelling reasons why I'm wrong about it. Even if I had a terrible experience with a game, I'm always willing to hear you out on why you think I'm wrong about it. And if you can provide those reasons, I'll probably replay it and try to see it in a different light. Because that's the real objective here. Reaching a higher understanding of not just what makes games good, but what makes them bad, or average, or overrated, or misunderstood as well. Which leads to better games and more enjoyment of said games. Also, my dislike of a game doesn't diminish or invalidate your love of it. So keep on loving the game. I don't want to take that away from you. And you shouldn't let me sway you that much anyway. I'm not some ultimate arbiter of game quality. I'm just some dude trying to have a discussion about what I love. As much as I wish it did sometimes, me saying something doesn't make it true. There's an emo girl with daddy issues in my room right now. See? It didn't work. Damn. The point is, don't get mad just because someone else doesn't like a game you like, or likes a game you hate, and be willing to listen to what they have to say. Maybe you're wrong, maybe they're wrong, maybe no one's wrong. It might just be a misunderstanding. Or you might have irreconcilable core values, and that's fine too. But you'll never find out which it is by refusing to talk to people. Okay, sorry for the rant. This game really put me in a state. But also, I feel like that needed to be said. And hey, now I can link people to this part of the video to save me time responding in the future. Alright, enough crashing out for one day. We're moving on. Wild Guns is a Cabal-like shooter game originally released on the SNES. but it received a remaster/expansion called Wild Guns Reloaded in 2016, made by the original developer. I went ahead and played both versions, first Reloaded and then the original. Wild Guns has an immediately recognizable Western steampunk hybrid aesthetic that helps it stand out from the crowd. It also boasts a kick-ass soundtrack and beautiful animation, but where it shines the brightest is in its gameplay. Enemies shoot at you and you have a reticle show up where their shot is going to hit. This gives you forewarning to get out of the way. However, there are also AoE attacks to dodge, melee enemies that occasionally show up, and dudes that throw dynamite at you which you can pick up and chuck back for massive damage. Almost every attack is telegraphed in a beautiful way, which ensures you barely ever take a cheap death. I was even able to first try 2 of the stages, which just shows how little artificial difficulty this game has when compared with its contemporaries. Wild Guns is by no means a simple game though. You have your standard moving and aiming on the D-pad, but aside from just being able to strafe to avoid enemy bullets, you're given both a dodge and a double jump. The double jump you have full control over and can change directions mid-air. The dodge you're locked into, but it gives you iframes, whereas the jump doesn't. There's another way of mitigating damage, however, kind of like a parry. You can shoot bullets down as they're traveling to you, which is made perfectly doable given the enemy reticles. This in turn builds your Vulcan meter, and once you fill it fully, you get invincibility and a super powerful gun for a limited time. This creates an added layer of strategy where you're trying to manage your Vulcan meter so that it'll activate during the tough bosses. There are also a number of guns to pick up, each of which is powerful and useful for different scenarios, but there is an element of risk associated with picking up a weapon. You oftentimes don't know what weapon you're picking up, and you could get the pea shooter. This gun does no damage, and you're stuck with it until you exhaust the ammo. This rarely slows down the pace of the game, however, because each screen is on a timer, with only the bosses needing to actually be defeated. And now that I'm a more experienced player, getting the pea shooter is often a blessing in disguise, because while it doesn't do any damage, it can still be used to shoot down enemy bullets, which allows me to solely focus on building my Vulcan meter. You can also tap the attack button quickly to bring out your lasso, which you can throw at enemies and certain bosses to slow them down. So as you can see, there's a lot of elements to juggle in this game, almost literally, and it's extremely overwhelming at first. But once you get into the rhythm of each level, you'll quickly get the hang of this delicate dance of death. For me, the biggest breakthrough I had was realizing that the best defense is a good offense. If you spend all of your time dodging, you get quickly overwhelmed, especially in the busier stages. But the more time you're able to spend standing your ground, quickly taking out enemies, throwing back dynamite, and building your Vulcan meter, the better. Wild Guns on SNES is basically perfect outside of a few nitpicks. It's a bit too easy to dodge roll into an unavoidable melee death with Clint, which is just a problem with the amount of screen real estate you have. And Annie feels borderline unplayable on the final boss. With how little room you're given to maneuver, you don't stand a snowball's chance in Texas of surviving more than 15 seconds while actually putting shots into anything. But again, minor nitpicks. After I wrote this, I 1cc'd the game with Annie and even beat the final boss with no bombs or Vulcan, so I rescind at this point. I was just mad 'cause bad. On the other hand, Reloaded is an above-average remaster of an already awesome game. You have improved visual and sound quality, plus 2 new stages, 2 new playable characters, and the addition of 4-person multiplayer. Reloaded, however, does have some issues, mostly to do with widescreen breaking the game a bit. All of the stages are made much easier with how much space you have to move around. The final boss stages suffer from this the most. The Mecha Man boss is made completely trivial when you can just stand at the edge of the screen and occasionally dodge the only one of his attacks that can hit you. In the second screen of the final boss, there's only one descending turret that you kill immediately, and then it never shows up again, as opposed to the original game where 2 turrets keep dropping down like in one of the earlier bosses. In the third screen of the final boss, the rolling missile tanks can't shoot you on the side of the screen either. There's also an exploit where melee enemies can't hit you if you're on the very edge of the screen. They just straight screwed up the final boss of Desolation Canyon as well. He's supposed to sweep both low and high with his flamethrower. It was actually one of the only good dodge checks in the game. But in Reloaded he only sweeps high, which means you can just stand there and shoot him most of the time. The Spider Crab boss is also made significantly easier when you can just stand to the side of his big volley. Reloaded also seems to have taken out the bonus stages as well. I could go on. Overall, I think Reloaded just needed a lot more playtesting to find and fix these issues, plus more enemy spawns in a few places to round out the difficulty of the larger stages. This lesser difficulty is also exacerbated by the two new characters, Bullet and especially Doris, being incredibly overpowered. As awesome as it is to have two more characters with unique playstyles, I wish they had toned them down a bit. I will say as well, the flying shift stage, which was added for the remaster, just kind of sucks. There's nothing preventing you from standing still and shooting all the very passive enemies until the end of the stage, which takes quite a long time to get to. Then the boss is really cool, but the entire way to get to him is just kind of boring and tedious. This is sort of balanced out by Underground, the other newly added stage being by far my favorite of the 8. Aside from those fairly minor issues, Reloaded has a fatal flaw that most of the negative reviews on Steam have already pointed out. While the game saves the level that you're on in single player, for multiplayer not only do you have a shared lives pool, but you also restart the entire game on a game over. Now, I get why they did this. Playing this game with 2 players, never mind 4, almost entirely trivializes the challenge, so there needed to be some level of added difficulty to balance it out. However, demanding a 1cc out of people that probably just want to jump on and have a good time playing an arcade game with their friends is utterly ridiculous. Whether it diminishes the difficulty or not, there should still at least be the option to save your level progress in multiplayer, the same as in the original. That's about all there is to say though. Wild Guns is charming, skillful, fun, nearly always fair, challenging but not taxing, and one of the best multiplayer games out there. It's an exemplary game in the niche Cabal shooter subgenre, and while I wish it could have been polished up a fair bit more, Reloaded is a vastly superior remaster to what we usually get, so I can't complain too much. That said, I can't really recommend it over the original either. It's pretty much down to preference. Personally, I think the SNES original is the stronger overall experience, whether it's single player or multiplayer. While of course I can nitpick until the end of time, at the end of the day I think my biggest complaint is I just wish there was more of it. Wild Guns on SNES is an A, and I'm going to put Reloaded just a touch lower at an A-. Alright guys, that's all we have for now. Part 2 will either be at the end of the year or whenever it gets long enough. What you're seeing on screen right now is how the 2025 games fit in with the rest of the list. I'll just let this scroll so you can take a look at it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.